Welcome back to our final installment of Summer of 1997. I am your host and narrator, Eliana J. Tonight on the Introverted Poets podcast, we pick up where we left off last night. It's Friday night, June 13th, 1997, for those of you who've been paying attention. Rather than taking the girls back home, Edward decided to pull off into League City and ask Lizzie why she couldn't keep it secret. Let's see what happens next.
What are you doing? Asked a scared Casey. I am asking Lizzie a question, Casey. I want to know why she felt the need to tell you my business with Sarah. Look, we're best friends, and we tell each other everything. So I was bound to find out, okay? And besides, the way, like I said, the way Sarah follows you around, and do you realize the damage you and Lizzie have done? Damage? Asked Lizzie, who was now crying. I could get kicked out of my pastoral program, pray, and Sarah could dump me, he shouted. We're sorry. Not yet, you are. He then grabbed Lizzie by the neck and began to apply pressure. Tell me again why you told Casey. Why did you take Marianne and Catherine back there? Did you want to see what makes a man a man? Talking through closed teeth, he shouted this in her face. Due to the pressure in her neck, however, Lizzie couldn't answer, nor could she breathe. Casey was desperately trying to open the car door, which had been locked from the outside as well. Stop it! Let us go, pleaded Casey. You're hurting her. Did you all ever think about how much gossip hurts others? He retorted. What about your dinner at Pastor Glenn's house? Don't you all have a farewell dinner? She desperately reminded. Edward didn't respond, however. With one final squeeze, Lizzie's body gave and slumped over onto the back seat. Casey looked at Edward, terrified. No. What have you done to Lizzie? She cried. Don't worry, you'll be with her soon enough, he whispered. Why are you doing this? Is this over a purity ring? It's not over a ring, he stated as he pulled Casey in closer to him. It's over girls like you ruining my life. He placed his hand around her neck, but Casey slapped his face. Ow! He shouted. He once more tried wrapping his hands around her neck. This time, however, Casey poked him in the eye. Ugh, you little bitch! He shouted. Casey then kicked the window open. She stuck her hand on the outside of the broken glass and pulled on the car door handle. She was able to open it and quickly run out into the fields. She figured by getting lost and hiding in the fields, he would give up and leave. But what would she tell Lizzie's parents? She made a right, and then a left, and then another right. She was out of breath and decided to squat down and lay low. She figured by staying still, she'd be able to hear if Edward was coming towards her. She could hear her heartbeat beating inside her ears. She felt it pulsating in her throat. Hidden between the tall stalks of grass and brush, Casey began praying to God that by some miracle, Lizzie would get up and run for help. However, deep down in the pit of her stomach, she knew she hadn't seen a gas station nearby, nor a house. She waited. Once she was done praying, she didn't hear a thing. What felt like an hour was only a few minutes, but to a frightened Casey, it was an eternity. She stayed sitting on the ground, hoping Edward would go away. She waited a few more minutes, and once more she heard nothing, just the rushing cars passing the Gulfway Highway. She turned around and saw the highway, miles away. If she screamed, who would hear her? If she ran, who would help her? She didn't know where she would run to. This was the first time visiting Galveston and League City. Hearing the cars rushing by made her make a break for it. She stood up from where she was crouching and made a run towards the highway. As she began sprinting past the Mustang, she noticed that Edward wasn't there anymore. The car was empty. She continued running and was trying to get towards Rockford Drive when suddenly her leg got caught up in something and landed face first. Ugh, she let out. Got you, Edward suddenly shouted. No, she cried. Yes. You are a floozy anyway, he stood up from where he was lying down and unbuckled his pants, and he took off his belt. He had one knee on Casey's lower back and the other one on the grass. Casey was still trying to move but was overpowered by a muscular Edward. The pizza and ice cream came back up. Gross, Edward remarked. He then placed his thick belt strap around Casey's neck and pulled tightly. No, she yelled before gurgling on her vomit. Whores like you have to go. Jason mentioned what you allowed him to do at the church. Did you honestly think a whore like you who does things like that at a place of worship would be good enough for me?" asked Edward. He then tightened the belt some more, and Casey's neck snapped. Her body slumped over and went limp. Edward placed it on the grass and pulled his pants back up. He looped his belt back on and walked towards his car. He opened the passenger door and slid the front seat to the front. He then grabbed Lizzie's stiff body and dragged it across the desolate field. He threw her onto the grass near where Casey had hidden. Edward hid, figuring that Casey was the impatient one. He hypothesized that she would run towards the highway. Taking a chance, he hid in the grass and patiently waited for her to run out. Sure enough, like a moth to a flame, Casey ran straight for the highway. He drove with both windows down and made it 20 minutes from League City towards Houston. He then got on the I-90 North and kept on driving as the sun set over downtown Houston. The time was now 7:15 p.m. Saturday. It was 9 a.m. and still no sign of Casey or Lizzie. Maria and Lilia were both sitting in the living room with Mary Elizabeth and Marianne.
"It's not like them to not come home. I know in my heart of hearts something terrible has happened."
Mary Elizabeth sobbed Lilia.
"Lilia and Maria, I know it is very worrisome, but we must pray and not lose faith. We don't know anything yet. Let's just call the police and file a missing persons report," consoled Mary Elizabeth.
Pastor Glenn, Juan, Hector, Henry, Evan, and the rest of the trade group, including Edward, walked into Lilia and Hector's living room. One thing that shocked Edward was that Mary Elizabeth and Pastor Glenn had not asked him about the incident at the creek. He was shocked at how Marianne acted like if nothing had happened. Maybe she hadn't tattled after all. He nervously looked around and noticed pictures of Lizzie in kindergarten up on the living room walls.
"Hey, were you able to find anything at the church?" asked Mary Elizabeth.
"No, honey," answered Pastor Glenn. "The troop helped, but unfortunately, nothing. We even looked past the creek and not a sign of them." "Well, we will be calling the police then," stated Maria, who reached for the telephone on the wall, and she began dialing.
"Yes, police? I would like to make a missing persons report. It's going to be two, actually. One is my daughter. The other is her friend. Yeah. Yes. Her mother is also here. We are on 1145 Fall Avenue, New Caney, near Kingwood."
She hung up the phone and made her way towards Mary Elizabeth and Lilia.
"I don't have a good feeling about this, Lily."
"Yes, Maria," answered Lilia.
"Always knows."
"Yes, I thought the killings had stopped already."
"Me too, Lily."
"Do you think that It's best not to think of such things and just pray," emphasized Mary Elizabeth. "The police say?" she asked. "They're sending some detectives over. In the meantime, I'm going to put some coffee." Lilia stayed staring at Edward. Tall, fair skin, and with light brown gelled hair. Edward caught her looking at him, and she quickly turned away. Edward made his way towards Lilia on the couch.
"Hey, I'm so sorry, but we're going to find your girls," he assured.
"¿Quién eres tú?" asked Lilia.
"Ay, perdón. Me llamo Eduardo, y estoy con el grupo PRE," he answered.
"How did you know my Lizzie?" asked Lilia.
"Oh, well, her and Casey assisted us all week long during camp, and we had a good time, which is why we stayed an extra few days to help you all find them."
Sarah walked in from behind him and hugged Lilia. She then sat next to her. Behind her came an Hector, who was followed by two detectives.
"They're here, Lily. Go tell Maria and Juan."
Lilia stood up and walked towards the kitchen. She came back out with Juan and Maria a moment later. Lilia sat on the three-seater couch with Sarah and next to Hector, and Juan and Maria stood behind them. "Good morning. I am Detective Lopez, and this is my partner, Detective Miller. I understand there are two girls missing?"
"Yes, our girls," sobbed Maria.
"I understand this might be very difficult, but we're going to need all of you to tell us what the girls look like, what they were wearing the last time you saw them."
"Elizabeth is short, fair skin, with straight hair, long, reaches to her back. She's about 5'2" and weighs 110 pounds and is athletic. She runs track," described Lilia. "Special marks, dental work, piercings, tattoos?" "No, Senor Lopez. My Lizzie is an angel and does not have tattoos,"
Lilia answered, offended. "What was she wearing?" asked Lopez.
I don't know. I was already gone for work by the time she left to camp with Casey and Juan. Mr. Fuentes, you drove the girls to school? Asked Detective Miller. Yes, every morning for the past 13 years, he responded. So you all have known each other for quite some time now, asked Miller. Yes. Can you tell us what they were wearing? I can try. Elizabeth was wearing jeans, her Templo Nuestro red polo shirt, and some tennis shoes. What kind of shoes? I'm not too sure, just regular sneakers, I guess, answered Mr. Fuentes. What about Casey? The same. She was wearing the same uniforms as they're both youth leaders at the camp. And a camp. What church is the camp for? Our church is the Templo Nuestro church in downtown Houston. Any reason y'all prefer that one over the ones here? We're Christians, not Lutherans. Okay, and what does Casey look like, Mr. and Mrs. Fuentes? Asked Miller. Well, Casey is a brunette like Lizzie, only with curly hair and slightly taller. She's about 5'5" and also athletic, explained Maria. Is she also on the track team? Asked Lopez. Yes. Okay, and the last place they've been seen is at the Templo Nuestro church near I-90 in downtown Houston. Lopez wrote this down on his notepad. Since they are minors, 16, we'll get this information out to the Houston County ASAP. Both detectives stepped out and left. Mary Elizabeth and Pastor Glenn took their place and comforted both families. Keep looking for them, assured Pastor Glenn. Where? Asked Mary Elizabeth. We'll look again at the church. What if they took the bus and went missing, mentioned Maria. Why would they take the bus, asked Mary Elizabeth. They can get rides from us. Well, Juan was running late from the meeting, so he asked Marcela to tell them about the bus, Maria. Maybe Marcela saw them last, figured Mary Elizabeth. What do you mean? The girls had to sign out every day along with the youth leaders at the end of each camp day. The sign-out requires a timeout as well. Maybe we can look at the logs and see when they signed out, suggested Mary Elizabeth. The three families hopped into their individual cars and followed Mary Elizabeth down the road. The troop joined the caravan in their prey van and followed them as well. After 45 minutes on the highway, they finally reached Templo Nuestro church. Rather than adhering to the parking lines sprayed on the floor, everyone parked whichever way and immediately made their way towards the administration building. Pastor Glenn nervously unlocked the door and swung the glass doors wide open. Mary Elizabeth, Lilia, and Maria quickly rushed in and made their way towards Marcela's office. Mary Elizabeth took the keys out of her front pocket and unlocked the side entrance leading into the office. The three walked in. Lilia and Maria did not know what to look for, but Mary Elizabeth did. I got a white binder and flipped through it. She flipped through it once fast, and now the second, and then the third time she scanned slowly. What's wrong? Asked Lilia, knowing too well what if the girls had signed out. Their signatures would have been found already. They didn't sign out Friday, whispered Mary Elizabeth. What? Asked Maria in disbelief. They didn't sign out Friday. They only signed in Friday morning. But they didn't sign out, restated Mary Elizabeth. So what does that mean? Asked Lilia. Then walked in Pastor Glenn. What did you find? He asked. The girls did not sign out Friday. Was the office locked during the dance? I don't know. Where was Marcela? Asked Glenn. At the dance. It shows everybody signed out except them, Mary Elizabeth explained. Maybe they're still here, stated Juan, who walked in behind Pastor Glenn. Again, the group took off scanning the parking lot and buildings of Templo Nuestro's church. The troop also joined by heading towards the fields and the creek. Mary Elizabeth picked up the phone and called the Houston Police Department. I'm calling in regards to the missing girls in Ucani. Yes, well, I don't know if you all know this, but here's these girls that have gone missing since last night from here downtown Houston. I'm calling from Templo Nuestro Church, Mary Elizabeth continued explaining. She figured if showing them the sign-out binder could help, why not use it? The time was noon and still no sign of the girls. The search party paused and sat for lunch. Pizza was delivered. They were all sitting in the assembly hall. The men in troop ate. The three mothers didn't. You have to eat something besides coffee, pleaded Hector with Lilia. I can't, Hector. I know something isn't right. Girls have never done something like this before. My intuition is telling me that something is very wrong, she hypothesized. Stella walked in with her husband, Pastor Emmanuel, with a box of baked goods. I came as soon as Marianne called me, she stated. The radio just began announcing the girl's disappearance, added Emmanuel. Marce, do you remember if the girls left early or if you saw them at the dance yesterday? Asked Mary Elizabeth. No, I was dancing with the kids in the church, she answered. Man, did you? Emmanuel looked at her, shaking his head in disagreement. No, I was on the dance floor as well, he answered, to everyone's disappointment. We wish we could help you out more, stated Isaiah, but we have to hit the road to make it to San Antonio for the other camp, he stated.
It's okay, stated Pastor Glenn. Thanks for the help anyway. We really appreciate your help, added Mary Elizabeth. Here, take some pizza for the road. She handed them 3 unopened boxes. The troop got up and hugged Pastor Glenn. Mary Elizabeth, Marcela, Pastor Emmanuel, Juan, Hector, Lilia, and Maria. We will be praying for their safe return, stated Edward, who was the last to give the farewell hugs to the congregation. The troop walked out of the church's assembly building and loaded onto the white prey van. They drove off, never to be seen again. Hours had gone by, and still no sign of the girls. Once the troop left, the remaining pastor showed up and began searching the area 3 more times. Nothing. Pastor Gilberto and his wife Lucinda checked closets with storage bins. Hector, Juan, and Pastor Ramiro searched 2 miles from the church. Also no sign. All they found was brown bags and sack lunches. Marcela searched the administration building with volunteers who had heard about the girls vanishing. Mary Elizabeth and Pastor Glenn were talking to the police and news crews about the girls. Maria and Lilia waited at the church in case the girls returned. 4 hours had passed. Still no sign of them. Another hour passed. Now 5:05 p.m., and a handful of volunteers arrived. A dozen people showed up. Still in shock that there was no sign of their girls, Lilia and Maria allowed Mary Elizabeth to handle the crowd. She broke them up into teams, and they went past beyond the 2 miles of the creek, 4 miles further down. Another went north instead. The third went east, and the fourth went west. Push mud and brush with sticks. Nothing. The team that headed north ended up under I-90 and found nothing. The team that ended up west also found nothing. Head back. No group found any signs of the girls. After 2 hours, the 3 families headed back home. It was 7:45, heading into New Caney. The sun was barely beginning to set. Lilia wondered why there wasn't any sign of the girls. What cruel God would allow this to happen? Sunday. 10 a.m. 2 little boys ride their bikes alongside a golden retriever named Lucky. One boy, husky, fair skin with blue eyes and a buzz cut, rode his black bike. The second boy was skinny, with long black shaggy hair, brown eyes, fair skin, with freckles. He also rode a green and black bike. The first day of summer. School had just ended, and the boys had no care in the world. 11, why would they anyway? The sun was shining, and the grass illuminated and danced with the breeze. Both boys were heading down Irving Road. They made a left on Calder and kept riding their bikes. Passed a few blocks followed by grass, trees, and weeds. The boys paused and looked at the abandoned oil fields. Once the boom of Houston and Galveston, now a ghost. He took off barking and running. Both boys quickly pedaled to keep up. "What is it, boys?" shouted the huskier one. Then suddenly Lucky made a sharp left onto a grassy stretch of land. The boys rode over the broken glass. "Careful with the tires!" shouted the skinnier one. "I'm trying to keep up with Lucky, Pat!" shouted the other boy. Lucky suddenly stopped at the end of the makeshift path on the grass and began whining. "What's the matter, boy?" asked the huskier boy. He suddenly stopped in his tracks too. "What did you find?" asked Patrick, who finally caught up with his friend. Both boys and the dog stood in shock. The body of a tan brunette with straight hair, wearing a tracksuit, was found lifeless at the end of the path. Her neck had a big purple mark around it, and her eyes were staring wide at the sky. Both boys dropped their bikes and ran back the road which they came. 30 minutes later. Within a few minutes, Calder Road was closed off and surrounded with squad cars, forensic vans, medical examiner, onlookers, several news reporters. Here live from Houston Fox 26, 2 bodies have been found on the stretch of the infamous Calder Road field between Galveston and Houston, right here in League City. I'm Trisha Sanchez reporting to you live and on site. A tan woman in a red skirt suit spoke in front of the camera. Aquí reportándoles desde Calder Road, aquí entre Houston y la isla de Galveston, se encuentra 2 chicas menores de 18 años muertas. A short tan man with salt and pepper hair. A tall 6'2" tan man with black curly hair in a tan suit walked past the yellow tape. "Excuse me, sir, we're going to need you too," said an officer before he was interrupted by the man's badge. "Oh, detective, right this way." Both men proceeded to where the medical examiner was taking photos of the deceased bodies. Further down, another examiner in a white suit and goggles was taking photos. "What do we have here?" he asked. Female Vicks found a couple of feet from each other, assuming they were both killed at the same time, informed an officer. "Any ID or belongings?" "No, sir. Nothing on them at all, which is strange. You know how teen girls are." "What's your name, detective?"
Detective Joe Lopez with the New Caney Police Department and also worked for the Houston Homicide Division for 15 years before moving to New Caney, stated Detective Lopez. The death, he asked. Not sure yet, answered a female voice in the white examiner suit. However, ligature marks around the neck show that she was strangled. The shards of glass show that she wasn't murdered here, but dumped. What else? The shards of glass were found a few feet away, assuming from a van. Time of death is about less than 24 hours, judging by the stage of decomposition. Lopez was writing down what the medical examiner was saying on his notepad. He didn't really look at the first Jane Doe, and the other body he asked while still writing down the information. Go ask Helen over there, she directed. She went back to taking more photos of the victim. And your name, he asked her? Rachel Wood, lead medical examiner of League City, Texas. Here's my card in case you need to call me for anything else, detective, she stated while handing him a card. Thank you, Miss Wood, he said while walking away. Joe took a few more steps back towards the direction he came. Close to the street sign of Irving and Calder Road, he met up with the second medical examiner. Helen, what have you got here? What we have here is an unidentified female who appeared to have been strangled. She was found face down and also has a bruise on her lower back. I am willing to bet cause of death was strangulation. The mark of a buckle is right on the center of her neck. Anything else? They also found shards of glass all over her hands and some DNA on her fingertips. We will need to take the swabs down to the lab and find out if they match anyone in the database. Assuming by the way she was found, she tried escaping her attacker. Any ID on her? No, nothing, detective. Whoever did this thought about it thoroughly. How long before we get the results on the swabs? About 72 hours to a week. We got other homicides in Houston as well, detective. All right, can you turn her around for me? Detective Lopez instructed. You heard him, boys, shouted Helen. Two bigger officers came and Jane Doe number 2 over, and just then it hit Detective Lopez. He had seen these Jane Does before. What's wrong, detective? Is this your first homicide? Asked Helen. Lopez walked away from the crime scene while pulling his black Nokia 10. He began dialing frantically. The phone rang twice and picked up. Miller here, the voice answered. We got a lead. Okay, and that's the end of summer of 1997. I am your host and author of the story, Ileana J. What an ending. For those of you just tuning in or are new to the Introverted Poets podcast, we are a safe space for the shy writer and poet who wishes to remain anonymous. We allow for them to submit their works anonymously and do readings. However, due to this being the first episode of season 2, we don't have an interview portion. I will be answering questions from the ones submitted to our social media accounts since they were posted 2 weeks in advance to airing this fortnight special event. Links for our social media accounts will be provided in the description below.
Hey,
It's Ruby
and Anna.
with Time to Waste.
A show about nothing.
That was a little promo for a podcast called Time to Waste by 3 good friends of mine named Anna, Ruby, and Amanda. The same place you hear our podcast is where you'll find theirs. Time to Waste is an amazing podcast, to say the least, and it's hilarious. I have to be really careful when I'm listening to them, because if I listen to them while I'm doing makeup, I'm going to come out looking like a clown, and not a funny clown, like a John Wayne Gacy clown. Ugh. And as mentioned in previous episodes, more information for Time to Waste will be posted on our episode's description. Now we're going to go into the Q&A for this episode. And it's not necessarily a Q&A. It's just me answering questions submitted by those who have read Summer of 1997 up on our Tumblr at www.theintrovertedpoetspodcast.tumblr.com. And the questions are submitted via Twitter, email, Messenger, Tumblr, and Instagram. And there was quite a few questions that we're going to get through. I'm only going to answer a couple just because I don't want to take too much time. Each episode was almost an hour, and whoopsies, not the point. But this first question, you write crime fiction. As mentioned in the previous season, I typically write autobiographical fiction. But since a very young age, I've always been into true crime, unsolved crimes. It first started with like Unsolved Mysteries with Robert Stack and then Dennis Ferreira. And then it turned into the Oxygen stuff like Snapped and now Discovery ID. And now I'm just watching stuff off of YouTube like Criminally Listed, Top 5 Unknowns. and reading like the book by Lieutenant Joe Kanda. He had a show on Discovery ID called Homicide Detective, and it's like I think that's the title of the book, and he recounts stories that they didn't air on TV because they were too violent and gruesome, and for good reason, they really are. And so that's what got me into writing true crime. So this next question reads, who is Edward based off of? Originally, this is not horrible, but it is what it is. Edward is based off of an ex-boyfriend of mine, and it was originally going to be like a disc piece, but then it just turned into something more. I was like, no, I'm better than that. Like, creatively too, like, I can write a better character than that. So I created Edward, and I took bits and pieces off of certain serial killers, like the narcissism I got straight off of Ted Bundy, because Ted Bundy was one narcissistic SOB. And also, like, Edward's attention to detail and capability of being able to hide in plain sight and have that Jekyll and Hyde thing going for him. So it's a little bit of everything, but more than nothing, Ted, because he's just trash. And there's more research about him. But the way he goes about it is going to be very different, I say. Or maybe not. Question 3 reads, who are Lizzie and Casey based off of? So Lizzie and Casey are based off of like me and my cousin, just because like that's what I know. And not just that, but I made them a little bit more reckless just because in my writing I really want to highlight like the polarity and the contrast and the similarities in the characters, if that makes sense. Question 4 reads, what secrets are the minor characters hiding, such as Sarah, Catherine, and the parents? Will there be more to their stories? So, like I mentioned in the first question, that this started like a one narrative as the collector, but then it expanded into summer of 1987, and now I'm working on the third part and the novel. So it's kind of like the series, I guess the fourth part would be the last one. So I just went off on a tangent and created like my own universe and my own world where like these characters are all going to be related one way or another. But that's like, I don't know, I don't want to say too much, but it's going to be fun. I'm having a lot of fun with it. I'm not following no set outline. I'm just writing the scenes I want to write first, and then I'll think about how I get there, but it needs to make sense because it still has to be realistic fiction since it is basing it off of a true crime. The next question reads, what themes are there besides the obvious murder mystery? It's just a critique on the hypocrisy and the duality that certain people live, at least through my experience with this one particular part of life. I'm not saying that like it's this way for everybody, but it was just a creative piece that I'm having fun with, and take what you will from it. And also it's kind of like an attack on how women have a certain rank they must adhere to, and that's always bothered me. So I made sure I mentioned that here and there. And also, it's just a throwback to those stay away from drugs people that they would take to us, and that they would make us sign paper pledges and stuff like that. And it is a creative piece and it's a fun piece, but also I made sure to load it with a lot of like obvious critiques and attacks on certain groups. But it's not to say that all of them are bad, and it's just the way it is, I guess, the way I see it. And it's not to stigmatize or be hateful. Question 8 reads, what genre is this? It would be a crime fiction or realistic fiction as well. And the next question is, what is the overall mood? The mood is, I want it to be entertaining, I want it to be thrilling, and I also want it to be funny, most importantly. And fun. Well, funny. The next question is, what is the process of writing or for writing Summer of 1987 and The Collector look like? Very similar yet different processes. Like I said, I do not like using outlines just because I feel that I'm undiagnosed ADHD, high functioning, or if that's even the proper terminology for that. I'm not too sure. I might have to double check that. But I cannot follow outlines. I feel like it's a little too restricting. So, like I mentioned, I write the scenes I wanted to write first. And then I went to, okay, well, how are we going to get there? Or how would you really get there? But for The Collector, it started off like very linearly. I went from beginning to end. I was writing like, okay, this is a contemplative piece. I'm getting very philosophical. I'm looking back. I'm reflecting. And then I was just like, I'm getting bored. Let's do something else. And then it took a total turn, a 180, and it ended like where you wouldn't expect it to end. Whereas with Summer of 1987, I had to do more research. I knew how I wanted it to end, but I definitely had to think about how I wanted to get there carefully with research. And also, like, I had to go back and look at my journals and think about personal anecdotes I was writing when I was casing Lizzie's age, because I remember I wrote about one of those stay away from drugs groups when they went to visit my middle school, and I was really like impacted by it for whatever reason, probably because I thought one of the guys was cute or whatever. And so I went back and I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to use for this character. And that's basically how Summer of 1987 is working. And now for part 3, Spring Break 1988, and then part 5, I haven't chosen a title for it, but for those, I am thinking about the endings, and some of them I'm thinking about doing a whole completely different script with it. But I still want all the minor characters to somehow connect here and there. But that's already, like I said, giving away too much. So on to the next question. How does writing these stories differ from anything else you've written? So as mentioned in the previous season and the first question, I usually write autobiographical fiction. And I write about basically my heart being broken into shreds. Yay. And also about how I feel about certain things, what I've done in my life. And that's usually just, free writing. I don't really have to think. It's just go, go, go. But with this, I really got to think and get really clever about it, because I don't want to make it like cliche either. I want to make it fun. I want to make it like not what you expect. I'm not too sure how I feel about Edward getting, quote unquote, Edward, because that's the name he's using here, getting caught. I don't know. Like, I really like him. Like, I never thought I would like my antagonist as much as I do. I don't really care for the protagonist. Next question is, what are the takeaway from these stories? I guess the main takeaway is just the hypocrisy certain institutions have, and just how, like, there's corruption in all levels. And also just, like, you never know a person until you know a person. It's just layers and layers of things. I can go on and on, but I don't want to give too much away. I would most definitely like to hear what other people thought from it, what they took from the stories. And this next question is, do you have a set idea how you want the series to end? As mentioned earlier, I do, but I don't. I do because, like, I kind of want to make it as realistic as possible and as true as it is to the cases it's based off of. As I mentioned in the first episode, it's based off of the I-35 Texas killing fields. I mean, I-45. Yes, I-45 Texas killing fields. And as mentioned, if you go to YouTube and look up criminally listed, you'll find the Texas killing fields. And a lot of these killers were not caught for a lot of these girls. And many of the investigators believe that it was multiple serial killers at the same time. So I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know if I want it to just only be Edward, or do I want it to be more? So it's something I have to think about. But for now, I'm just focusing on part 3. And the final question is, can you tell us more about the novel you're working on pertaining to these 2 stories, The Collector and Summer of 1987? Okay, so as mentioned, it's on the I-45 Texas killing fields, and it's a stretch of highway that has been a famous dumping ground for more than 30 years, since the 70s, and it's been going on still. However, I do want to make it more based in Laredo, because there's a lot of murder that goes on here that doesn't really get talked about. But I wanted to, like, The Collector is supposed to be just setting base for the novel, where in the novel they find one of the bodies here at Father McNabote Park, and it's true, there have been bodies found there. And I just wanted to write a story about that Jane Doe. And then I thought, why not connect it to The Collector? And then why not connect The Collector to Summer of 1987? And there's where it just took off, where I kind of want to make each victim a narrative. And then fictional victim, not the real one, but like a fictional victim, a narrative. And I want it to I want the novel to have references to that, if that makes sense. But it's a lot of research that I have to do. It's a lot of fine tuning. And who knows, like, maybe I'll stop doing that and throw it away. But for now, that's what it is. And with that concludes the 4-night season 2 premiere of the Introverted Poets podcast. I have been your host and narrator, Ileana Jade. Tune in next time on April 3rd to check out A Goddess on Fire. I've been posting her poems for a while now, but I'll be reposting them on the Instagram, Tumblr, and Twitter. More links will be provided in the description. And also check out our episode's description for all the cool social medias you all should follow. And if you're from Laredo, check out Coffee and Magic on 107.3 FM with Sammy the House and Elsa. As mentioned before, we are never asked or paid to promote content or creators or streamers. This is just stuff that we find cool and think they should be touted out, and we want to make Laredo proud, whether you are still living or not in Laredo and are creating something, or a small business owner. We want to make sure you get touted out and heard about, because it's time for the small fish to swim in the bigger pond. As always, stay safe this spring break.